It's Friday, March 14th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, celebrating 60 years of Land and Sea, a cultural institution for this province, 6 decades of highlighting the way of life and living, stories in nature, culture, and community, all colliding together. I just wanted to let that play. I was going to talk, and I was like, this is just so nice. All right. This is The Signal. We're talking 60 years Land and Sea. The first voice laughing is Land and Sea host Jane Adey. Also, we have Mr. Dave Quinton here, one of the original hosts of Land and Sea. How are you both doing?
Very well. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Mr. Quinton, thank you so much for coming in. All right, folks. As you heard in the news there, today's show is not the full hour. At 12:30 Newfoundland time, noon in most of Labrador, we're handing things over to the network because a new prime minister is being sworn in with a new cabinet. So we've got, only about 23 minutes of chatter. So I will stop talking and get into things with my guests here. 6 decades, 60 years of Land and Sea. Jane, what does that mean to you? As the latest host?
Well, to me, it's a real point of pride for our province, not only the CBC, but our province, to have a show that has been on the air this long. It's one of the longest-running television shows in the world. I believe it's the longest-running current affairs show at the CBC, for sure. But it has to be one of the longest-running programs in the world. So imagine that.
Dave Quinton, when you started with Land and Sea, did you think it was going to go on for 60 years? Did you think about length at all, or were you just too busy doing a show? Was it a show a week back then?
We were trying to get the first show together, and we figured this would be it. If we make this, we'll celebrate. But it kept going, it kept getting better, I hope. And as we learned, we improved the show. And, of course, you couldn't miss here in Newfoundland. There's so much beautiful places and people and stories. And we were privileged to be able to put shows together.
When you had a blank canvas and you started, what were those first story meetings or meetings like for talking about what to do and how to figure out what stories to tell? Because you were making it up as you went.
Yes. Well, first you were sitting down, myself and Rab Carnell, who was the first host, really with me. I was with him, I should say. Put down on paper what you're trying to do, and really, even the questions. You'd spend hours and hours just thinking up questions. And this seems amazing now, but back then it was new. We were journalists. We were just trying to put together a program called Land and Sea and trying to figure out what would be the best way to do it. And it worked. Not at the very beginning. We made some miserable programs. But as we went along, things improved. And eventually we got to where we are now.
When did you feel that this program was starting to strike a chord with folks? Because in the beginning it must have been a little weird for folks, right?
Yes. Well, I think the first time I said, hey, this is wonderful, to be able to do this program was an old gentleman called Uncle Walter. He wasn't my uncle, but as you know, in Newfoundland, that happens automatically. I was out on boat with him when I was a young fellow, and we did a show on him. He was the last of the fishermen, one of the last of the fishermen who fished alone, by himself, of course, with sail and oar, no engine. He'd never had an engine in his life, and he wasn't going to get one. But he managed to catch fish, to make a living, and to express himself so beautifully that I think that was the first magical show.
Yeah, it's the one where you're like, we got it. We got something here. This is,
exactly.
Let's bottle this one and then try to replicate it.
Yeah.
And when you first started, and before this show started today, you, Jane, and I were talking about the beginnings. It was a show a week?
Yes, every week, and they were half-hour shows. There were no commercials, and it was black and white, of course, no color then. And we had to send the film, black and white film, away to Halifax to be developed, then wait for the plane to come back with us before we even saw the film. So the shows weren't very fancy at the beginning because it was just an ordeal to get it on air in time.
And how many towns do you think you visited over the years with Land and Sea? How many communities of this province? I mean, all of them?
Oh, my Lord. I think there's something like 1,200 places in Newfoundland, but we had hundreds of shows.
Yeah.
So we've covered quite a few. But and then some places, of course, the bigger places, you go back several times. But there's no shortage of material. And there's still no shortage of material. There's still 100 places I'd love to go and make a program if I were younger.
It's so true,
Jane.
It's so true, isn't it? Right? Like the stories are not the problem because the stories are everywhere in this province. And let me ask the person who's doing the stories now, Jane. What's it like looking for stories these days? Like, because I know they must come at you from all over, but what's that like in your position?
It is so easy.
Yeah.
In this province, full of colorful characters and people who want to be a part of this show. I'm amazed. I get so many calls to the office from people who have suggestions.
Yeah.
This would make a great show. And what I'm amazed by is how well they know the show, how well they know the content that we're looking for. They will suggest characters. They'll go on to suggest particular shots that we'll be able to get, views and vistas that we'll really want to get, you know, this particular old shed in the community that you'll want to visit. They're producers. They know exactly the elements that go into making a Land and Sea. It's astonishing. People know the material so well.
I'll tell you now, if I phoned Jane Adey with a suggestion for a show and a shot, and that made it into a final show, I mean, that's pretty, like, you win the Newfoundland, like, bingo checklist or whatever you want to call it for that one. That's amazing.
It's amazing. They've been watching so long that they just know it. They know the material.
We like Land and Sea, it's on Gem and it's also on YouTube and stuff, right? So sometimes I'll look at like numbers. So like, for example, when we put the signal up, it might get like 500 views. And then I'll look at Land and Sea, I'm like, oh, 100,000 views. Like it is so popular. And when I travel around the province, I hear about, like, there's literally anywhere I go with work in this province, people talk to me about Land and Sea, which is, I think, the history and the culture and the building of everything for this show. To hear about not anything else we're doing, typically it's Land and Sea. What's it like rolling into a place now, Jane, when you go into a community?
Well, I'll borrow a line from cameraman Ted Dillon, who was just in the show that we had on this past weekend.
Fine man, that Ted Dillon.
Ted Dillon says, it's like we're rock stars. It's the closest thing you can come to being a rock star in Newfoundland. But it is such a beautiful welcome that we get from people when we, literally, when you roll into town and you're going into a gas station and you're gassing up and people might recognize the vehicle, or they'll look at your face and think, oh, how do I know that person? And then they'll say, oh, I know you work for CBC. What are you doing here? And we say, we're here for Land and Sea. Well, the smile that comes across their faces is amazing. And it makes you feel so good about the job that you're doing. You can imagine, having that kind of welcome.
Yeah. Mr. Quinton, when Land and Sea first started and you're going into someone's house and, like, this is a new show, What was the reception like in the beginning when you're like, okay, we're bringing cameras in and we're making a program called Land and Sea, and everyone's like, what are you talking about?
Well, people were curious, of course,
yeah.
but we were welcomed in even from the very start, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I can't remember any place or any time when we weren't welcome.
Yeah.
And things just rolled on from there. Sometimes you were steered to somebody in the community who would make a good show. In other words, you had your star picked out before we even went into the house. But people were generally, exclusively, I would say, happy to see us, and things were always worked out.
Yeah.
I guess there were a few bombs on the way, but I can't remember any.
No. What was it like being on the road back then and travel?
Oh, my Lord. The roads were terrible back in '64.
Worse than now.
Worse than now. Yeah. Now they're good now compared.
Yeah.
I think you could drive on pavement to Holyrood. And some places, of course, didn't have roads at all. And parts of Newfoundland didn't have reception. We did a lot of shows that the people in the area didn't really see because there was no television there. And the Northern Peninsula and places like that, parts of Labrador and South Coast, I guess.
Wow.
And not everybody had TVs, even though if you had electricity. So things rolled from a slow start.
So then what was it like finding out, because I know stories were coming at you from everywhere, but if you're going into communities that were isolated, you're hearing stories that, I think people sometimes it's easy for someone like myself to forget in this age of like high-tech communication and everyone's got a smartphone. But back then, communication was not what it is now by a long shot. How are you finding stuff out to go to these places and connect with people?
Well, one way at the very beginning was we were also involved in radio. We had a fisheries broadcast and a farm broadcast every day of the week. Well, not Saturday and Sunday, but 5 days. So that sort of put us in contact with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then, well, we all had our contacts. And once we started, other people came in, like Jane just mentioned. It spreads around. Hey, that was not a bad show, that last week program. But we should come over and get Uncle John on Land and Sea. And away we went.
Yeah, once it starts, right, the dominoes just keep falling for shows. Folks, you're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. We're celebrating 60 years of Land and Sea on the show today, and we're only half an hour today, so we're over halfway through because there's a swearing in of the new Prime Minister Designate Mark Carney. As you're listening to the show, if you've got thoughts for us, thesignal@cbc.ca. You can text us 709-327-8206. And we're just talking about what Land and Sea has meant to this province, to the communities. 6 decades of stories. We do have a guest on the line, though. But first, Jane, tell me about Joanne Broaders. Give me an introduction here.
Well, Joanne Broaders is a firecracker. She is a teacher at Smallwood Academy in Gambo, and I met Joanne through a story that we did last season about a Mi'kmaq cemetery in Gambo that Joanne Broaders brought her students to, and they wanted to find out who was buried there. So that's just a little bit of the background, how we connected. But Joanne is a big fan of Land and Sea, and maybe I'll let her tell you about how she uses it in her classroom, which I find so interesting.
Hi, Joanne. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, Adam. Thanks. How are you? Hi, Jane. Hi, Dave.
Hi. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. Tell us about your classroom and Land and Sea and how you use it.
Okay, sure. I'll give you a couple of examples of how we use it in the classroom. I guess most recently we watched the episode We Were Rangers, and that was an absolutely fantastic episode, honoring the Newfoundland Rangers here in the province. And one man in particular, the last living ranger, Cyril Goodyear, the show pointed out that he was going to celebrate his 99th birthday in April. So my grade 8 students and I made birthday cards for Ranger Goodyear, and we sent them to the West Coast, and his niece actually got back in contact with me, and she's going to deliver the birthday cards to him, and she's going to do a FaceTime call with the class so that we can talk to Searle as well.
That's something. That is, what do the students think about this?
Oh, you know what? They're just loving it. They really, really are. They're excited about meeting Searle, because when we watch that episode, like many of the episodes, you realize some of these people could have movies about them. And certainly the Rangers, you'd get many movies about some of the heroic episodes that they were encountered in their careers, for sure.
What is it about Land and Sea that just makes it so teachable for these moments? I mean, that one is very straightforward. I think anyone listening can obviously understand. But for all the other episodes, what you dig into, what is it about this show that you think makes so important with connecting with young folks as they come up?
Well, I think we're living in an age when there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there, and sometimes the news is stressful. And Land and Sea captures everything that's beautiful about Newfoundland and Labrador. I've said it many times that if I wasn't from here and I watched episodes of the show, I would want to come here, visit the places, meet the people, because it's always so positive. There's a great sense of community and a great sense of love that we have for the people and the places that are in Newfoundland and Labrador. And Land and Sea, it's everywhere. There are very few communities, I think, in the province that haven't been touched by Land and Sea.
How do you keep track of all the shows? Because we're up on GEM now, and also, it's on YouTube. What do you do for keeping track of the shows for teaching and for bringing it into your curriculum?
Well, I've been teaching a long time, so I started off with VHS tapes of the good shows that you could use in class. But recently, I went into the whole CBC GEM, and I created a document done by all the titles and the seasons and how you can connect it to the curricula. So it's a 21-page document, and it's easy. So now I just go in, and whatever title I'm looking for, I know exactly where to get it. So I just go straight to CBC GEM and use it. And it's nice, too, because students can look at it and look at some of the titles and ask questions about it as well, and point out what they might like to do. And all of it can be incorporated certainly into the classes like social studies in grade 8, because it's all about Newfoundland and Labrador.
So, yeah, I'm just, what do I know? But if you're doing it and that's all done, that would be, you could replicate that for other classes across the province, couldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a firm believer that Land and Sea could be a course, secondary or post-secondary, because the history is all there, and it's done in such an interesting way. Dave back 60 years ago and Jane today have been fantastic hosts who have that gift to be able to tell great stories, and the students love listening to them in the classroom. So it's an easy thing to incorporate into any class.
Joanne, we'll have to leave it there because we're short on time today, but thanks so much for coming on the program and taking time out of your lunch break. And good luck with the course and the curriculum and everything else.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye. Joanne Bryars there. So then, for both of you, when you hear a teacher in this province talk about using Land and Sea and young people connecting with recent shows going back decades, what does that say to you?
It makes me proud and thrilled to hear that, because young people today, sometimes you think they're not interested and they have no real interest in what you're doing, but by gosh, that's wonderful.
It's meaningful, yeah. Jane?
Same. Just so proud and just so happy that young people are viewing it in that way and learning about our culture and our history, because we do have such a rich tradition in this province of storytelling and learning through stories. And I think it's a real testament to the work that's been done long before me even, that people love the archival shows.
Yeah.
The feedback that we get when we air archival shows, we get as much or more from the archival shows than we do from the new ones. People love to watch and rewatch this material. So as I said, it's a real testament to the storytellers who've come before me and the interest that continues for this show.
Well, it's such a window into the life and living of the province and all of the communities, like the independently and together, right? It's windows back into that. Mr. Quinton, what makes a good land and sea?
Wow, how do I answer that?
We need another couple hours. Go on.
Yes. Well, you have to have somebody in the show that is talkative and has lived the life that you're trying to represent, and a good fisherman, a fisherman's wife, somebody of interesting past, something. There's always somebody out there with a story to tell, and they can tell their story. It's as simple as that. People telling their own stories. And there's no shortage of material. There never was, and there never will be. Not here in Newfoundland, for sure.
There's something so great when you start talking to someone and you're like, yes, this is so good. Right away, when you hear someone start, you know this is going to be a great chat, a great interview. Jane, I'm assuming that's similar, hey?
Oh, yes. And I had the good fortune of hosting the broadcast for many years. And I have to say that some of the characters that I've featured in recent shows, I've gotten from my time on the broadcast. But as soon as you call someone, either you have a kernel of an idea or someone has called and given you a phone number. As soon as you call someone, you know if they're chatty and, have a good turn of phrase. People in this province have such an interesting turn of phrase. So, you get on the phone with them, time flies by and you realize, okay, this is a great character. There's lots of people in this province who can carry a story and you know that they will be a great character to feature on Land and Sea.
How much learning do you do, or did you do with because every story, a different person, a different background. How much learning has there been and is there with Land and Sea for both of you personally?
Well, I don't know what to say to that.
It's constant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, every day, every show.
Yeah.
Everybody has something to say, and you find gems all over the place.
Yeah.
Comments and new ways of saying things and interesting stories from the past, and just to see the way people work now. How years ago it was cod traps. Every third or fourth show seemed to be a cod trap being hauled. But there's something exciting about that kind of thing. There's action, a bit of action. There's a bit of scenery. There's people talking and telling about their lives, and that's of interest to everybody.
Yeah, and I think I've known Dave a while, and I think when you're curious, and we're curious, we wouldn't be in this business if we weren't. But this is the dream job for anyone who's got a sense of curiosity.
It is the job. Yeah.
Yeah, it is the dream job. You get to go places, and you get to ask people all kinds of interesting questions, and you are constantly learning. So any job here at CBC kind of is a dream job in that way. But this one in particular, where you get to go out into communities, places that you've never been and always wanted to go, places that are at the end of the road, really interesting places that not a lot of people get to because they're remote. It's a great job.
Yeah. Mr. Quinton, any final thoughts just on 60 years of Land and Sea and what's been built?
Just that it was the best job in the world.
Yeah. So many stories. Thanks for coming in for this. I appreciate the chat.
Thank you for this.
Yeah. Jane, thank you. I'll be seeing you around the office.
Yes. And thanks to everybody who continues to support the show and continues to watch. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. That's it for today. You've been listening to The Signal, celebrating 60 years of Land and Sea. Stay tuned for special coverage of the swearing-in of Prime Minister-designate Mark Carney and his new cabinet as they form Canada's new government at a time of economic uncertainty. The radio special will be co-hosted by Catherine Cullen and John Northcott. I'm going to stop talking and let this music take us out.